Hello and welcome to this Philbert Flies review of Deimos Inc.'s Milan Malpensa scenery for Microsoft Flight Simulator. You join me here on approach to runway 17 left, and as always I'm starting with an approach to give you a look at the surrounding area and the opportunity to gauge the performance of this scenery on my system. You can find my system specs and graphics settings in the video description below. I'll let you watch the approach and landing in peace, and I'll speak to you again when we're parked up at a gate. We'll then take a good look around the airport in different weather and lighting conditions, and I'll finish up by telling you what I think of it. Speak to you shortly. Welcome to Malpensa. We're parked up here on stand 413 and we'll start by watching the jetway connect to the aircraft. These do appear to be default jetways. The good news is they look quite similar to the real thing and they do connect perfectly as a result of being default. The bad news is they don't look exactly like the real thing, and the way they connect to the terminal is just a little bit unrealistic from my point of view. Let's move on to have a look at some of the texturing and modelling. So the first thing to note is that generally at this airport the textures are very flat and pretty low resolution. They really do have an air of FS 2004 about them, I'm afraid. We do have PBR materials in use. You'll notice a little bit of reflection on the windows, but even if you get slightly close you'll notice a great deal of pixelation and blurriness. The modelling's nothing to write home about either. The positioning of the windows leaves a lot to be desired, and even the types of windows in use don't match the real airport. Just have a look here, it looks like a child's sticker drawing really of an airport. There's also a great deal of detail missing on the roofs. I'm afraid things are no better at the main terminal building. These structures down here are supposed to represent roof lights, they look nothing like them. The paths seem to have been drawn at random. The windows again don't match the real thing in any way, shape or form, they just look like badly stuck on stickers. I'm really struggling to find a positive here, but I have found one. I like the weathering on these concrete textures. Unfortunately, when you get at all close, the whole thing just turns into a blurry mess due to the low resolution. The landside part of Terminal 1 looks absolutely nothing like the real thing at all, and that's all I'm going to say on that. I have to say the control tower looks pretty reasonable. They've done quite a good job of modelling it, it looks a lot like the real thing, and the textures are nicely weathered. The developer has included quite a nice amount of ground clutter. These fire engines look good, and there are air stairs, luggage dollies and other things scattered about the airport, so that also is a positive. At first glance, Terminal 2 appears to be slightly better done than Terminal 1. The textures are a little bit crisper, they're weathered, and the windows look slightly more plausible. They're still strange shapes and sizes and they don't much look like the real airport, but it's certainly an improvement. However, there's a lot of very strange goings on at this terminal. The colours on these staircases are a complete work of fiction as far as I can tell. They look nothing like the real things. Nor does this staircase here. It's just a random staircase placed where there is a staircase that looks nothing like it. We've also got a floating building on the roof. And around the front we have some buses that are just ploughed into the terminal building. So really there's been no quality control or attention to detail on this airport at all, as far as I can tell. The ground textures aren't too bad. They're pretty crisp and they've got a good amount of debris and scuff marks and things like that. That's not to say they look like the real airport, they don't, but they do at least give the impression of a busy airport. The ground markings, on the other hand, I'm not a fan of. They look very bright and clean to me, but I would say at least that most of them seem to be in the right places. The taxiways actually look pretty good. They do look very much like the real airport. Some of the markings are a little bit inaccurate here and there, but yeah, this is a nice job. And I would say the same for the runways. We've got a good amount of rubber marking and they look pretty realistic. They're not spot on, but they're fairly close to what the real airport looks like in the satellite imagery. This is the night lighting. Random splodges of light on the ground. No obvious light sources for a lot of the patches of light, and the terminal looks very much like a default autogen airport. Terminal 2 looks a bit, but not much, better. But the taxiway lighting, the runway lighting, and the lighting on some of these remote stands is actually not too bad. Here's Malpensa in the rain, and the ground textures support the default reflections and puddles very nicely. The ground markings stick out a little bit in general, and no more so than this line here, which almost looks like it's emitting light of its own. I've never seen that before. It's very odd. And here we have Malpensa in the snow. As you can see, some of the areas have no snow, others have thick coverings, and this is the norm for Microsoft Flight Simulator sceneries. I actually learnt an interesting fact about this last night from Max of Mako Simulations, who's developing Manchester and Birmingham. And that fact was that the depth of snow is controlled by the lightness or darkness of the ground texture. So snow won't settle on darker areas by default, which is interesting and slightly random in my opinion. So overall, what do I think of Deimos Inc.'s Malpensa? Well, as you've probably gathered by now, I don't like it. I mentioned towards the beginning of the review that it reminded me of an FS 2004 scenery, but on reflection I think that's unfair to a lot of the sceneries that were developed for that sim. It's not without its good points. The tower looks alright, I like the use of clutter, and the ground textures are mostly pretty good. But unfortunately, these do little to distract from the poor modelling, dreadful texturing, and bad night lighting. This feels like someone decided to try their hand at scenery design, found that it was quite hard, gave up and thought, meh, I'll stick it on Sim Market and see what happens. But they've stuck it on Sim Market for €19.80. That's more expensive than Aerosoft's Cologne Bonn, which is, in my opinion, the best European scenery to date. It's more expensive than Flytampa's Las Vegas, which I think is the best North American scenery to date. And I cannot get my head around why anyone would want to pay even a quarter of that for this scenery. A bit of a downer this review, and I'm sorry about that. I much prefer singing the praises of great add-on airports to trashing poor quality ones, but I hope you found it useful nonetheless. If you have, do please like, subscribe and donate if you're feeling flush. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon here on Philbert Flies. Bye bye.